Duke raced down the dock, heart pounding. With every step, the ship pulled farther away until he leaped across the gap, calling out in desperation, "The Duchy is dead to me until you return." But was it too late to undo the damage he'd done? Would Edith ever trust him again, or had he shattered their love beyond repair? Hello, lovelies. Enjoying Edith and Elijah's tumultuous journey? A like or subscribe would mean the world. It helps me bring you more sweeping tales of love and betrayal from history's most scandalous moments. And please, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I read every note, and it truly brightens my day to hear from you. Southampton Docks, April 1824. The sea had no mercy. Lady Edith Ernest understood that now, standing at the rail of the SS Britannia as the ship pulled away from Southampton's crowded docks. The gap between vessel and shore widened with each passing second 3 feet, then 4, then 5, and with it, the distance between her past and whatever bleak future awaited her in America. The salt wind tore at her cream bonnet, whipping the ribbons against her throat like accusations. Her pale blue traveling gown, the finest thing she still owned, fluttered against the rail. In her gloved hands, she clutched a single leather valise. Everything she had been, Lady Edith Ernest, daughter of the Earl of Thornbury, once betrothed to a duke, had been reduced to this: one bag, one ticket, and a heart so thoroughly broken she wondered if it still beat at all. Around her, passengers crowded the deck, waving handkerchiefs at loved ones below, calling out final goodbyes. Children squealed with excitement. A woman wept into her husband's shoulder. Life, Edith thought bitterly, continued for everyone else. For her, it had ended 3 months ago in a drawing room in Mayfair, when the man she loved had looked at her with eyes of ice and said, "I will not have my name attached to a woman of questionable virtue." She forced herself to look away from the docks, away from England, away from everything she had lost. The grey waters of the Channel stretched before her, cold and indifferent, appropriate. Then the shouting began. At first, Edith thought it was just the typical chaos of departure dock workers calling instructions, sailors securing lines, merchants haggling over last-minute cargo. But this was different. This was panic. "Make way! Move!" The voice was raw, desperate, cutting through the cacophony of the port like a blade. Edith's hand tightened on the rail, but she did not turn. She would not look back. Looking back was what had nearly destroyed her the first time. "Stop that ship, Edith." Her breath caught. She knew that voice. It had haunted her dreams for 3 months, sometimes warm with the memory of what they'd had, more often cold with the memory of what he'd done. No, it couldn't be. Edith Ernest. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Edith turned. The Duke of Wrendale had abandoned his carriage in the middle of the port road, the door still hanging open, his driver shouting protests that went unheard. Elijah Walter sprinted down the crowded dock as if demons pursued him, and perhaps they did, the demons of his own making. 2 hours, his mind screamed, as his boots pounded against the wooden planks. I've had 2 hours to undo 3 months of devastation. 2 hours since Viscount Harrington had stumbled into Wrendale House, drunk and weeping, and confessed everything. 2 hours since Elijah's world had collapsed into a single, devastating truth. Edith was innocent. She had always been innocent. And he had been the architect of her ruin. "Out of my way!" he roared, shoving past a sailor rolling a barrel. The man cursed, but Elijah didn't care. His title, his dignity, his carefully maintained composure, none of it mattered, not anymore. The Britannia was already pulling away, its massive hull creaking as the crew worked the sails. 6 feet of churning water separated the ship from the dock. Even as Elijah watched, it became 7. Too far. A voice of reason whispered in his mind, "You'll never make it." But reason had cost him everything. Reason had made him believe forged letters over the woman he loved. Reason had turned him into a coward. It ran faster. The crowd on the dock had begun to notice him now, a duke in full morning dress, his navy coat flying behind him, his white cravat askew, running like a madman toward a departing ship. Whispers erupted. Fingers pointed. Somewhere, someone laughed. Elijah didn't care. He reached the edge of the dock, his boots skidding on the wet wood. The gap was 8 feet now, maybe 9. The water below churned dark and violent, slapping against the pilings with enough force to crush a man. He saw her. She stood at the upper rail, her pale blue gown bright against the grey sky, her hazel eyes wide with shock. In that frozen moment, Elijah saw everything he had destroyed: her trust, her reputation, her future. The woman he had promised to protect, and instead had cast into the wolves. No more. Without thought, without hesitation, without a single consideration for the impossibility of what he was about to do, Elijah Walter, Duke of Wrendale, leaped. Time seemed to slow. Edith watched, her hand pressed to her mouth, as Elijah launched himself off the dock. His body arced through the air, cloak billowing like dark wings, arms outstretched. For one impossible second, he seemed to hang suspended between earth and sea, between past and present. Then gravity claimed him. His boots hit the ship's lower rail with a sickening crack. His hands scrabbled against the wet rope netting that hung along the hull, fingers closing around the thick hemp just as his body swung downward. His shoulder slammed into the ship's side, and Edith heard him grunt in pain even from the upper deck. "Man overboard!" a sailor shouted, though Elijah wasn't overboard, not quite. He clung to the netting, boots scraping against the hull, soaking wet from the spray, his breath coming in ragged gasps. 3 sailors rushed to the rail, leaning over to haul him up. Elijah's arms shook with effort as he climbed, hand over hand, until they could grip his coat and pull him bodily onto the deck. He collapsed onto the wooden planks, water streaming from his clothes, his chest heaving. Around him, passengers stared in stunned silence. A child began to cry. Someone muttered a prayer. And then, slowly, Elijah Walter stood. His coat was soaked through, clinging to his frame. His hair, usually swept back in perfect ducal fashion, hung in wet strands across his forehead. Blood seeped from a scrape on his palm, where the rope had torn through his glove. But his grey-blue eyes, those eyes that had once looked at her with such warmth, then such devastating coldness, burned with an intensity that stole Edith's breath. He saw her at the upper rail, and he began to climb. Sailors moved aside, too shocked to stop him. Passengers pressed back against the masts and rigging, creating a path. Elijah's boots left wet prints on the stairs as he climbed to the upper deck, his gaze never leaving Edith's face. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She wanted to collapse and weep and demand to know why, after everything, he was here. But she stood frozen, her gloved hands gripping the rail so tightly the seams began to split. Elijah reached the upper deck and stopped, 10 feet away. Water dripped from his clothes, forming a puddle at his feet. His breath came in harsh gasps, and his bleeding hand, trembled at his side. For a long moment, the only sounds were the creak of the ship's rigging, the slap of waves against the hull, and the distant roar of the crowd still gathered on the receding dock. Then Elijah Walter, Duke of Wrendale, opened his mouth and shattered what remained of his carefully constructed life. "Edith," his voice cracked, raw with desperation. "Edith Ernest, I renounce it." The deck fell silent. Even the wind seemed to still. "I renounce all of it." He spread his arms wide, his coat dripping, his face a mask of anguish. "The Duchy is dead to me until you return." The words echoed across the water, carrying back to the shore where hundreds of witnesses stood frozen in shock. A duke, publicly renouncing his title. For a woman, for a ruined woman. Edith's vision blurred. She blinked, and tears she had sworn she had no more of spilled down her cheeks. A memory struck her with the force of a physical blow. 3 months ago, this same dock, a cold January morning, Elijah had brought her here to watch the ships depart, his arm warm and solid beneath her gloved hand. The wind had been gentler then, and so had he. "One day," he had said, his voice warm with promise, "we'll travel together, not as Duke and Duchess performing duty, but as husband and wife seeking adventure." She had laughed, leaning into his shoulder. "Where shall we go?" "Everywhere," he had replied, and kissed her temple. "Anywhere you wish." That man, that warm, gentle man, had vanished the moment scandal touched his pristine reputation. The memory shattered, and she was back on the deck, staring at the drenched, desperate stranger who wore Elijah's face. "Edith," he said again, quieter now, but the word carried in the unnatural silence. He took a step forward. "Please, I know the truth. I know what Margaret did. I know you're innocent." Something cold and hard settled in Edith's chest. Her tears stopped. Her trembling ceased. When she spoke, her voice was steady and sharp as winter ice. "You're too late, Your Grace." The words landed like stones. Elijah flinched as if she'd struck him. On the dock below, the crowd erupted. Whispers became shouts. Gasps became exclamations. By nightfall, every drawing-room in London would be buzzing with the tale. The Duke who jumped for his ruined fiancée, only to be rejected before hundreds of witnesses. Edith forced herself to meet his gaze. His grey-blue eyes, once so controlled, so cold, now brimmed with anguish, desperation, and something that looked almost like hope. She crushed that hope with her next words. "I no longer care what you know, or what you believe, or what Margaret did." Her gloved fingers gripped the rail so tightly the fabric finally tore. "You showed me who you are when it mattered. When scandal touched your perfect reputation, you cast me aside like refuse. You didn't ask for my side. You didn't investigate. You simply believed." "Edith." "No." The word cracked like a whip. Around them, passengers leaned closer, shameless in their eavesdropping. Edith didn't care. She was beyond shame, beyond ruin, beyond everything except the cold fury that had sustained her through 3 months of hell. "You believed I could betray you," she said, "that I could lie to you, that I could destroy everything we had for what? An affair with a married man? You looked at me, Elijah Walter, and you saw a stranger, someone capable of deception. I was wrong." His voice broke. "God help me, I was wrong." "Yes," Edith agreed, and her hazel eyes were dry now, burning with a cold fire. "You were. And now you expect me to forgive you because you've discovered the truth? Because you've made a grand gesture?" She gestured to his soaked coat, his bleeding hand. The ship still pulling away from England, though the captain had apparently ordered the vessel slowed, the crew unwilling to miss the spectacle unfolding on their deck. "You've ruined yourself for me," Edith said. "How very noble, how very dramatic. But you're too late, Your Grace." She turned her back on him, facing the open sea. Behind her, she heard Elijah take a shuddering breath. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried in the silence. "Then let me be too late. Let me be ruined. But don't sail away believing I didn't love you. Don't sail away thinking you meant nothing." Edith closed her eyes. "What you loved," she said quietly, "was the idea of me. The perfect, biddable Lady Edith, who would give you heirs and cause no scandal. The moment I ceased to be perfect, your love vanished." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" She whirled to face him, and the fury in her eyes made him step back. "Then why did you never open my letters? Why did you never grant me even one audience? Why did you dissolve our engagement in the Times, like I was nothing more than a failed business transaction?" She saw the answer in his stricken face. Because he had been afraid. Afraid of being made a fool. Afraid of scandal. Afraid of anything that might tarnish the pristine reputation of the Duke of Wrendale. "You're too late," Edith repeated, and this time her voice was soft. "Final. Go home, Your Grace. Go back to your duchy. I'm sure it will comfort you far better than I ever could." She turned away again, her torn gloves clutching the rail, her back rigid. Behind her, Elijah Walter Duke, peer of the realm, one of the most powerful men in England, stood dripping and broken before hundreds of witnesses. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, he had absolutely no idea what to do. Chapter 2. The Scandal. 3 months earlier, London. Lady Edith Ernest had never expected a love match. The daughter of an impoverished earl whose estate existed more on credit than coin, she had been raised with practical expectations. A respectable marriage to a respectable gentleman, perhaps a younger son with a modest income, or a widower in need of a mother for his children. Love, her mother had told her with weary resignation, was a luxury their family could no longer afford. And then Elijah Walter, Duke of Wrendale, had asked her to dance. It had been at the Hartwell Ball in early December, the first major event of the winter season. Edith had been standing near the potted palms, that universal refuge of wallflowers and impoverished gentry, when he appeared before her like something from a novel, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair, and those extraordinary grey-blue eyes that seemed to see straight through society's pretenses. "Lady Edith," he had said, offering his gloved hand, "would you do me the honor?" She had been too shocked to do anything but nod. The waltz that followed had changed everything, not because of romance, not yet, but because of conversation. While other couples danced in strained silence or exchanged banal pleasantries about the weather, Elijah had asked her opinion on the Reform Bill currently being debated in Parliament. "Most ladies find politics tiresome," he had said, a challenge in his tone. "Most gentlemen find ladies' opinions inconvenient," she had countered. He had laughed a genuine, delighted sound, and from that moment, Something had shifted between them. Their courtship became the talk of London, the Duke and the impoverished Earl's daughter. Duty and circumstance should have made it impossible, yet week after week, Elijah called at Thornbury House. He took her to the opera, where they argued about Mozart in hushed whispers, while society matrons glared their disapproval. He walked with her in Hyde Park, where she made him laugh with her acerbic observations about the Tun's more ridiculous members. "You're nothing like the simpering debutantes my mother keeps pushing at me," he had said one cold afternoon in early January, as they strolled past the Serpentine. "Should I simper more?" Edith had teased, batting her eyelashes in an exaggerated fashion. God, no. He had caught her hand, a scandalous gesture in public, even for an engaged couple, and his thumb had brushed across her glove. "I chose you, Edith, not for breeding or connections or dowry. I chose you." That night, lying in her narrow bed in her father's crumbling townhouse, Edith had allowed herself to believe in fairy tales, in love matches, in the possibility that a girl like her could marry a duke and live happily ever after. She had been such a fool. The package arrived at Elijah's solicitor's office on a grey Tuesday morning in late January. Mr. Pembroke, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the cautious demeanour of someone who had spent 40 years navigating the legal affairs of the aristocracy, received it from a messenger boy who vanished into the London fog before questions could be asked. The package was unremarkable: brown paper, sealed with ordinary wax, no identifying marks, but its contents were anything but ordinary. 3 letters, written in an elegant feminine hand on expensive cream stationery, each one signed simply E. Pembroke read them once, his face growing paler with each line. Then he read them again, this time making careful notes. By the third reading, his hand trembled slightly as he reached for his pen. "Your Grace," he wrote to the Duke of Wrendale, "I must request your immediate attendance at my office on a matter of utmost urgency and discretion regarding your engagement to Lady Edith Ernest." Elijah arrived within the hour, his face set in the controlled expression he wore like armour in public. But Pembroke knew him well enough to see the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed once against his thigh before stilling. "What is it, Pembroke?" Your note was cryptic. The solicitor gestured to the chair across from his desk. "You should sit, Your Grace." "I'll stand. What's this about?" Pembroke adjusted his spectacles, a nervous habit. "I received a package this morning, anonymous. It contains correspondence, allegedly written by Lady Edith." "Correspondence?" Elijah's tone sharpened. "What sort of correspondence?" In answer, Pembroke slid the 3 letters across the desk. Elijah read them standing, his face becoming progressively more rigid with each line. "My darling," the first letter began, "Thursday's meeting at the Garden Folly was far too brief. I think of nothing but your touch, the way you whispered my name when we were finally alone." The second letter detailed an alleged meeting at a coaching inn on the Dover Road. The third made plans for an assignation in a private theatre box, ending with, "Until twilight, when I am yours again. Burn this, E." Pressed between the pages of the second letter was a violet, dried and faded but still recognizable. Elijah set the letters down with controlled precision. "Where did you get these?" "Anonymous messenger. No return address, no identifying." "They're forgeries." Elijah's voice was flat, certain. "They must be." "Your Grace." Pembroke's tone was gentle, apologetic. "The handwriting matches samples I have of Lady Edith's correspondence. The stationery is consistent with what her family uses. And the violet. What about it?" "Lady Edith wore violets to the Pemberton ball last week. Multiple witnesses can attest to it. The locations mentioned the Kensington Garden Folly, the Dover Road coaching inn. These are all places Lady Edith has been seen, accompanied by her maid, in daylight, on perfectly innocent errands." But even as Elijah said it, doubt crept into his voice like poison. Pembroke removed his spectacles and cleaned them, buying time. "Your Grace, I must advise caution. If these letters are genuine, and if they become public knowledge, the scandal would be catastrophic." Elijah finished the thought, his voice hollow. "Not just for you, but for the lady herself. The question is, what do you wish to do?" Elijah stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the letters. 3 pieces of paper that could destroy everything: his engagement, Edith's reputation, his own standing as a man of honor who had chosen unwisely. When he finally spoke, his voice had become the cold, flat tone of a duke making a business decision. Summon Lord Thornbury. The engagement is dissolved. Edith learned of her ruin from her father. She had been in the morning room of Thornbury House, responding to wedding invitations, when the Earl burst through the door like a storm made flesh. "What have you done?" The pen fell from her hand, spattering ink across the ivory cardstock. "Father, what?" "The Duke has dissolved the engagement." Her father's face was purple with rage. "Dissolved it? No explanation, no warning, just a curt summons to his solicitor's office, where I was informed that my daughter is no longer fit to be the Duchess of Wrendale." The world seemed to tilt. Edith gripped the edge of the writing desk, her knuckles white. There must be some mistake. Elijah would never. "Elijah?" Her father's laugh was bitter. "He's the Duke, girl, not Elijah. And he's made it clear he wants nothing more to do with you. What did you do? Did you disgrace yourself? Compromise your virtue? Because I swear by God, if you've ruined this family's one chance at—" "I did nothing," Edith's voice cracked. "I have no idea what you're talking about." But her father was beyond listening. He raged for 20 minutes about her ingratitude, her stupidity, her failure, and through it all, Edith sat frozen, trying to understand how the man who had held her hand in Hyde Park just 3 days ago could simply cast her aside without even a word of explanation. That evening, the notice appeared in the Times. "The Duke of Wrendale regrets to announce the dissolution of his engagement to Lady Edith Ernest, effective immediately." 23 words. That was all it took to destroy her life. The whispers began immediately. At first, they were veiled, the kind of speculation that society trafficked in like currency. But without any explanation from the Duke, imagination filled the void. By the end of the week, the rumors had solidified into accepted fact. Lady Edith Ernest had been caught in an affair, with whom varied depending on the source, but the affair itself became an unquestioned truth. Invitations stopped arriving. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. At the modiste's shop where she went to cancel her wedding trousseau, the shopgirl literally turned her back. Her mother wept constantly, a ghost drifting through the halls of their townhouse. Her father alternated between rage and stony silence. And Elijah said nothing, did nothing. The man she had thought she loved simply vanished from her life as completely as if he had never existed. Edith wrote to him. 5 letters in total, each one more desperate than the last. "Please, Elijah, tell me what I've done. Let me defend myself. I don't understand. Your Grace, I beg you for one audience. There has been some terrible mistake. Whatever you believe about me, it's not true. I swear on my mother's life, I have done nothing wrong." None of the letters received replies. She didn't know that they had never been opened, that Elijah's secretary had burned them on orders to cease all contact with the Ernest family. She only knew that the man she loved had looked at her and found her wanting, and hadn't even cared enough to tell her. Why? Present day, the ship's deck. "You're too late," Edith said again, and the memory of those 3 months, the humiliation, the isolation, the slow death of hope, hardened her voice to steel. Elijah stood before her, dripping and desperate, and she felt nothing. Or rather, she felt everything at once, rage and grief, and a bitter, poisonous satisfaction that he was finally suffering even a fraction of what she had endured. "I didn't know," he said, his voice raw. "Edith, I swear to you, I thought the evidence was—" "Evidence?" She turned to face him fully, and her hazel eyes blazed. "What evidence?" "The letters. The letters you allegedly wrote to Viscount Harrington. Margaret forged them, planted evidence, bribed servants." "Letters?" Edith's voice rose. "You believed letters over me? Over everything we had? I saw the handwriting, the locations you'd been, the pressed flower, and it never occurred to you to simply ask me. Each word was a knife, to grant me even one conversation before you destroyed me." Elijah's face crumpled. "I thought I was protecting the Duchy, protecting you from further scandal if the letters became public." "Protecting yourself," Edith corrected coldly, "from the embarrassment of having chosen poorly, from the scandal of being made a fool." She saw the truth of it in his stricken expression. "I wrote to you," she continued, her voice shaking now with suppressed emotion, 5 times, begging for a chance to explain, to understand. "You never even opened them, did you?" His silence was answer enough. Edith laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "You're too late, Your Grace. 3 months too late. You can leap across all the harbours in England, renounce all the titles you possess, and it won't change what you did. You saw evidence and believed it. You saw me and doubted everything. Behind them, the ship's captain cleared his throat. Your Grace, my lady, we cannot remain stationary indefinitely. But neither Edith nor Elijah moved, locked in a tableau of broken trust and devastated love. I will go to America, Edith said quietly, and you will return to your duchy. That is how this ends. No. The word was barely a whisper. Please, Edith, don't. You're too late, she said one final time, and turned her back on the Duke of Wrendale. Chapter 3. The Architect of Ruin. 2 months earlier, Mayfair. Lady Margaret Ashcroft had learned early in life that survival required ruthlessness. Widowed at 30, left with a modest income and a son to raise, she had watched with calculating eyes as her cousin Elijah inherited the Duchy of Wrendale at the age of 25. The title, the estates, the fortune, all of it had passed to him with the effortless inevitability of primogeniture. But Elijah had no heir, no brothers, no uncles. The line of succession, should anything happen to him, led directly to Margaret's son, Edward. For 9 years, Margaret had nurtured that possibility like a gardener tending a delicate seedling. She had positioned herself as Elijah's trusted family advisor. She had ensured Edward received the finest education, moved in the right circles, developed the bearing of a future duke. She had been patient, and then Elijah had announced his engagement to Edith Ernest. Margaret had smiled and offered congratulations, while internally calculating how quickly a duchess could produce an heir. 9 months after the wedding, perhaps, a year at most, and with a single birth, Edward's future, her future, would vanish like morning mist, unless something were done. Lady Edith, how delightful to see you. Margaret swept into the modiste's shop on Bond Street with the practiced grace of a woman who knew precisely how to make an entrance. Edith, standing before a mirror draped in ivory silk, turned with a startled smile. Lady Margaret, I didn't expect. I couldn't resist. Margaret clasped Edith's hands warmly. My cousin is finally settling down, and with such a charming girl, you must let me help with the preparations. I insist. It had been absurdly easy. Edith, new to aristocratic circles and still uncertain of her place, had been pathetically grateful for the attention. Margaret became a fixture at her side, attending fittings, taking tea, offering advice on everything from flowers to guest lists. You went to Kensington Gardens yesterday? Margaret asked one afternoon, over tea at Thornbury House, her tone light and conversational. Yes, with my maid. The winter roses were still blooming near the Folly, quite remarkable for January. Margaret filed the information away. Kensington Gardens, the Folly, winter roses. And I heard you accompanied your mother to Dover last week? Just for the day. She has cousins there. We stopped at the coaching inn, the White Hart, for luncheon on the return journey. Dover, the White Hart, midday. Every casual conversation was an intelligence operation. Every innocent detail became ammunition. By mid-January, Margaret knew Edith's schedule better than Edith herself did. More importantly, she knew exactly how to weaponize it. The forgery. The shop in Cheapside was tucked between a pawnbroker and a gin house, the kind of establishment that respectable ladies never entered. Margaret, heavily veiled and wearing her plainest cloak, slipped inside after dark. The forger was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and no questions. Margaret had found him through connections she preferred not to examine too closely, the kind of people who inhabited the shadows of London society. I need letters, she said, sliding a sample of Edith's handwriting across the scarred wooden table. 3 of them, each one more intimate than the last. The forger studied the sample, a thank-you note Edith had written to Margaret after a particularly enjoyable tea. His lips pursed thoughtfully. The hand is educated, not difficult, but it will require quality paper. Time. You have 1 week. I'll pay £50. His eyes widened. For that price, he'd have forged the king's signature. Margaret dictated the contents herself, pulling details from her carefully gathered intelligence. My darling, Thursday's meeting at the Garden Folly was far too brief. The Kensington visit became a lover's tryst, the coaching inn on the Dover road. An innocent lunch with her mother transformed into an illicit assignation, our stolen hours in the private box, a perfectly respectable evening at the theatre, chaperoned by Margaret herself, ironically reimagined as something sordid. The forger worked with meticulous care, matching not just the handwriting but the rhythm of Edith's natural prose. Margaret had provided enough sample letters that he could mimic her phrasing, her turns of speech. When he presented the finished product, even Margaret was impressed. "And the signature?" she asked. He added a simple E to each letter with a flourish. Plausibly deniable, but damning. Perfect. The evidence. But letters alone might not be enough. Margaret needed physical proof, something that would place a gentleman in Edith's rooms in her possession. Viscount Harrington was the obvious choice. Married, reasonably handsome, and most importantly vulnerable. Margaret had discovered his affair with Lady Crestwood quite by accident, witnessing an indiscreet encounter at a country house party. She had filed that information away as she did everything, ammunition for a future battle. The battle had arrived. "Lord Harrington," Margaret said, cornering him at a ball, "might I have a word?" In a private alcove, she laid out the situation with brutal efficiency. "I know about Lady Crestwood. I have a witness prepared to testify to what they saw. Her husband is a very jealous man, as you know, and very proficient with pistols." Harrington's face went white. "What do you want?" "Your silence. Certain allegations may be made about Lady Edith Ernest. Should anyone ask you about them, you will say nothing. You will not defend her. You will not denounce the accusations. You will simply remain silent." "That's all?" "That's all." It wasn't, of course, but Harrington was too panicked to question further. He agreed with a shaking hand and too much wine. Margaret obtained one of his cufflinks, not stolen, simply acquired through a servant she'd bribed at his household. It was a distinctive piece, gold with a small sapphire, his family crest engraved on the back. The final piece of the puzzle, the bribed maid. Clara had been Edith's lady's maid for 3 years. She was loyal, competent, and Margaret had discovered desperately in debt. £50, Margaret said, meeting the girl in a tea shop far from Mayfair. "For one small service." Clara's hands trembled around her cup. "What service?" "You will place this cufflink in Lady Edith's sitting room, somewhere visible but not obvious, perhaps beneath a cushion, as if it had fallen there. And you will mention, in the hearing of other servants, that you've noticed a gentleman caller at odd hours. You needn't name him, just mention it." But Lady Edith would never. £50, Margaret repeated. "That's enough to clear your father's debts, is it not? To save your family from debtor's prison?" Clara took the money. She hated herself for it, but she took it. The cufflink was planted the next day. The whispers began among the servants immediately after, spreading like wildfire through the interconnected network of London's household staff. By the time the forged letters arrived at the solicitor's office, the groundwork was already laid. The whispers gave the letters credibility. The cufflink gave them physical proof. And Elijah, bound by duty and terrified of scandal, did exactly what Margaret had predicted. He believed the evidence over the woman. Margaret's victory should have been absolute. The engagement was dissolved. Edith was ruined. Elijah showed no signs of seeking another bride. Edward's position as heir was secure, but she had underestimated one variable: Viscount Harrington's conscience. The man was weak, but he wasn't entirely without feeling. As the weeks passed and he watched Edith's name dragged through the mud, watched her family retreat from society, watched the light die in her eyes at the few public events she still dared to attend, something in him began to crack. He started drinking more, sleeping less. His affair with Lady Crestwood soured. She found him maudlin and tiresome. "You destroyed that girl," she said one night, pulling away from his embrace. "Everyone knows the Duke dissolved the engagement because of her affair with you. Whether it's true or not hardly matters now." "It's not true," Harrington whispered. "Then why don't you say something?" Because he was a coward. Because Margaret's threats still hung over him like a blade. But cowardice, he was discovering, had its own special torment. 2 hours before the ship, Viscount Harrington arrived at Wrendale House at 6:30 in the morning, dishevelled and reeking of gin. The butler tried to turn him away, but Harrington pushed past him with the desperate strength of a man who had finally reached his breaking point. "I must see the Duke. I must see him now." Elijah was in his study, reviewing shipping manifests over coffee, when his butler announced the unexpected visitor. "Harrington? At this hour?" The Viscount stumbled into the study, his cravat askew, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. "Your Grace, I can no longer bear this. I must tell you—" "Sit down before you fall down, man." Elijah gestured to a chair, his expression more irritated than concerned. "What the devil is the matter with you?" "Lady Edith." Harrington collapsed into the chair. "Lady Edith is innocent. The study went very quiet. Even the fire seemed to still. "What did you say?" Elijah's voice was dangerously soft. "The letters, the affair, all of it was fabricated. By your cousin, Lady Margaret." The words tumbled out in a rush, as if saying them quickly might lessen their weight. "She discovered my affair with Lady Crestwood. She threatened to expose me unless I remained silent about the false accusations against Lady Edith." Elijah set down his coffee cup with such careful precision that it didn't make a sound. "You're drunk." "I am. But I'm also telling you the truth." Harrington pulled a crumpled letter from his pocket. "Margaret wrote this to me. Instructions, threats. It's all here." Elijah snatched the letter and read it by the morning light. Margaret's handwriting, Margaret's seal, Margaret's words outlining the entire conspiracy. "You will say nothing about the allegations against Lady Edith. Should anyone ask, you will confirm that she visited you, that you were close. Your affair with Lady C will remain our secret, provided you cooperate." The paper crumpled in Elijah's fist. "The cufflink," his voice was hollow, "planted by Lady Edith's maid. Margaret bribed her. The letters were forgeries, hired some forger in Cheapside, from what I understand. And I," Harrington's voice broke, "I said nothing. I let an innocent woman be destroyed because I was too much a coward to face my own scandal." Elijah stood slowly, his face drained of all color. The room tilted slightly. He gripped the edge of his desk. "When did this happen?" "Margaret approached me in mid-January, before the letters were delivered to your solicitor, and you've known for 3 months. The words were frost. "For 3 months, you've watched Lady Edith's reputation be destroyed, watched her family suffer, and you said nothing." "I'm saying it now." Harrington stood, swaying slightly. "I know I'm damned for my cowardice, but you should know, you deserve to know that lady is innocent. She has always been innocent." Elijah's mind raced, memories cascading with horrifying clarity. Edith's letters, unread and burned, her protestations of innocence, ignored, the confusion and hurt in her hazel eyes the last time he'd seen her, at the opera, before she'd fled his cold stare. "Where is she now?" Elijah asked. "I don't know. I heard there are rumors she's leaving London." "Leaving England entirely." Elijah strode to the door and bellowed for his butler. "Find out where Lady Edith Ernest is, now." It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes that felt like 20 years. 20 minutes during which Elijah stood motionless in his study, staring at Margaret's letter, understanding with devastating clarity what he had done. He had destroyed the woman he loved, not through cruelty or malice, but through doubt, through cowardice, through choosing reputation over trust. The butler returned, breathless. "Your Grace, Lady Edith is at Southampton. She boards a ship for America this morning, the SS Britannia. It departs at 8 o'clock. Elijah checked his pocket watch. 7:45. "Ready the fastest carriage. We ride now." "Your Grace," Southampton is 40 miles. Now, as he ran from his study, he heard Harrington call after him, "Your Grace, what will you do about Lady Margaret?" "She can wait," Elijah shouted back. "Edith cannot." Chapter 4. The Unravelling. Wrendale House, 2 hours before departure. Harrington's crumpled letter lay on Elijah's desk like a piece of evidence at a trial which, in essence, it was. A trial where Elijah stood as both judge and accused. "Get out," Elijah said quietly, his eyes still fixed on Margaret's handwriting. "Before I forget, you came here to confess, and remember only that you stayed silent for 3 months." Harrington stumbled from the study, his relief at unburdening his conscience tempered by the cold fury in the Duke's voice. The moment the door closed, Elijah's carefully maintained composure shattered. He swept his arm across the desk, sending papers, inkwell, and coffee cup crashing to the floor. The porcelain shattered, black liquid spreading across the Persian rug like a stain of guilt. 3 months. For 3 months, Edith had lived under the weight of accusations she couldn't even defend against, because no one, least of all him, had bothered to ask for her side. For 3 months, she had been cut, whispered about, turned away from shops and drawing rooms, while he had gone about his ducal business with the satisfaction of a man who had narrowly avoided a disastrous marriage, except he hadn't avoided anything. He had simply destroyed the only woman he'd ever loved. A knock at the door made him spin around, rage still hot in his veins. His secretary, Mr. Howell, entered with the cautious air of a man approaching a wounded animal. "Your Grace," I heard a disturbance. "Lady Edith's letters." Elijah's voice was deadly calm now, which was somehow worse than his earlier fury. The ones she sent after the scandal. Where are they? Howell's face went the color of old parchment. Your Grace. Answer me, Howell. Where are the letters Lady Edith sent to me in February? The secretary's throat worked convulsively. I disposed of them, Your Grace. You had ordered all contact with the Ernest family to cease, and I thought— You thought? Elijah advanced on the man. You took it upon yourself to destroy personal correspondence addressed to me? On whose authority? Your Grace, you were quite clear that I ordered you to stop arranging meetings, to return any gifts still in our possession. I never authorized you to destroy letters addressed to me personally. Each word was a hammer blow. Howell seemed to shrink into himself. I have documentation, Your Grace. A note recording the disposal, as per household protocol. Show me. With trembling hands, Howell led him to the library. From a drawer in the writing desk, he produced a small wooden box. Inside were ashes, fine, grey, utterly final, and 5 wax seals, melted and deformed but still bearing the Ernest family crest. 5 letters. She had written to him 5 times, and every single one had been burned without his knowledge. Beside the ashes lay a note in Howell's meticulous handwriting. Correspondence from Lady Edith Ernest. Disposed of as per instructions to cease all contact with the Ernest family, the 3rd of February 1824. Elijah lifted one of the melted seals, the wax still bearing the faint impression of a rose, the Ernest family symbol. It was warm from being enclosed, as if the letter had just been sealed, as if Edith's fingers had just pressed it closed. What did they say? He asked, his voice hollow. Your Grace? The letters, before you burned them. What did they say? Howell looked genuinely stricken. I didn't read them, Your Grace. It would have been improper. I simply saw they were from Lady Edith, confirmed they should be disposed of per your orders, and burned them unread. Of course, even in destruction, proper protocol had been observed. Elijah sank into the chair by the fireplace, still holding the box of ashes. The morning sun streaming through the windows seemed obscenely cheerful, illuminating the physical remains of Edith's desperate attempts to reach him. He could imagine what she'd written, the progression from confusion to pleading to desperation to, finally, cold acceptance. Elijah, please, I don't understand what's happened. Let me see you. Let me explain. Your Grace, I am begging you for one audience. Whatever you believe about me, it isn't true. I don't know what I've done to deserve this, but I swear on everything I hold sacred that I am innocent. Why won't you answer me? Why won't you even grant me the dignity of an accusation I can address? And finally, I understand now. You never truly knew me at all. Get out, Howell, Elijah whispered, and send for my solicitor. Immediately. Your Grace, if I may. Now. Pembroke arrived within the hour, his expression grave. He'd clearly heard about Harrington's early morning confession. News travelled fast in London's legal circles. Your Grace. He set his leather case on the desk with careful precision. I came as soon as I received your summons. The letters you showed me in January, the ones allegedly from Lady Edith. Where are they now? Pembroke produced them from his case, 3 pieces of cream stationery, still bearing that elegant, damning script. Elijah spread them across his desk, studying them with fresh eyes. The handwriting was good, excellent, even. But now that he was looking for forgery rather than confirmation of his worst fears, he could see the tiny inconsistencies, the slightly too careful formation of certain letters, the unnatural consistency of the script, as if someone had been painstakingly copying rather than writing naturally. I need the name of the best handwriting expert in London, Elijah said. Someone who can confirm these are forgeries. Your Grace, even if they are forgeries, the damage to Lady Edith's reputation can be undone, will be undone. I'll proclaim her innocence from the floor of Parliament if I have to. He looked up, his grey-blue eyes blazing. But first, I need proof. Incontrovertible proof that these letters are false. Pembroke nodded slowly. There's a man, Mr. Ashworth, who has testified in several fraud cases. He's considered the foremost expert on questioned documents in England. Retain him. Today. Whatever his fee, pay it. Your Grace, such an investigation will take time. Then he can begin after I return from Southampton. Elijah checked his pocket watch. 7:20. Lady Edith boards a ship for America this morning. I intend to stop her. Pembroke's eyebrows rose. Your Grace, Southampton is 40 miles, yes, I'm aware. Elijah was already moving toward the door. I also need you to begin proceedings against Lady Margaret Ashcroft. Fraud, conspiracy, whatever charges apply. And locate the maid Clara, I believe her name is. She was bribed to plant evidence. I want a full confession. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. So is allowing an innocent woman to be destroyed because I was too much a coward to trust her. Elijah paused at the door. Pembroke, I have spent 3 months making the worst mistake of my life. I have perhaps 45 minutes to attempt to correct it, so either help me or get out of my way. The solicitor gathered his papers with renewed urgency. I'll begin immediately, Your Grace. Elijah took the stairs to his chambers 2 at a time. His valet appeared, startled by the sudden commotion. Your Grace, you're not dressed for... I don't care. Elijah yanked open the top drawer of his desk, his hands moving with desperate purpose. Where is it? Where? His fingers closed around a small velvet box. The betrothal ring. He had commissioned it in December, spending hours with the jeweler to find the perfect stone. The sapphire had to be exactly right, deep blue, with veins of gold that caught the light. The precise shade of Edith's eyes when she laughed at something he'd said. The setting was delicate platinum, with tiny diamonds forming a crown around the central stone. Fit for a duchess, fit for his duchess. He'd planned to present it to her on Christmas Eve, in front of her family's fire, while snow fell softly outside and the future stretched before them like an unwritten book. Instead, it had sat in his drawer for 4 months, a monument to his failure, a symbol of everything he'd destroyed with his doubt. He opened the box. The sapphire caught the morning light, throwing blue shadows across his palm. Your Grace, his valet tried again. You're still in morning dress. Surely you should change before. There's no time. Elijah pocketed the ring box and ran for the door. The racing curricle was already waiting in the drive, 4 of his finest horses stamping impatiently. Simmons, his driver, stood ready by the lead horse, his former cavalry training evident in his bearing. Southampton, Your Grace, he asked, his tone carefully neutral. As fast as these horses can manage. Simmons's weathered face showed no surprise. That's 40 miles, Your Grace, in less than 2 hours. I don't care if you have to drive through hedgerows and farmyards. The SS Britannia departs at 8 o'clock. I need to be at Southampton Docks before it sails. Elijah climbed into the curricle. And Simmons, if we make it in time, I'll double your annual salary. A slight smile crossed the driver's face. Hold tight, Your Grace. The whip cracked, and the curricle lurched forward with enough force to nearly throw Elijah from his seat. The world became a blur of motion. The light, 2-wheeled curricle was built for speed, not comfort. Every rut in the road sent jarring vibrations through Elijah's spine. Every corner had to be taken at breakneck speed, the curricle tilting dangerously on its wheels. They thundered through the outskirts of London, scattering pedestrians and drawing curses from cart drivers. A constable shouted something about public safety that was lost in the wind and the pounding of hooves. Elijah gripped the rail with white knuckles, the velvet ring box pressed against his chest. His mind raced even faster than the horses. What would he say to her? The apologies that ran through his head all seemed pathetically inadequate. I'm sorry didn't begin to cover the magnitude of his betrayal. I was wrong, stated the obvious. I love you felt like theft. How dare he claim love after destroying her? But he would say them anyway. All of them. He would fall to his knees on that ship's deck if he had to, before hundreds of witnesses, and beg for something he had absolutely no right to ask for: forgiveness. They careened around a mail coach on a narrow stretch of road. The mail driver shouted obscenities. Simmons ignored him, urging the horses faster. 7:40, Your Grace, he called over his shoulder. 20 minutes. The ship sailed in 20 minutes. They splashed through a ford, water spraying up to soak Elijah's already disheveled coat. His cravat had come undone, his hair was wild, his morning coat streaked with mud from the road spray. He looked, he realized, like a madman. Good. A madman was probably what this situation required. The countryside flew past fields and farms and villages that blurred into insignificance. Nothing mattered except the road ahead, the horses' straining muscles, the impossible deadline racing toward them. Let me not be too late, Elijah prayed silently. Please, God, let me not be too late. At 7:52, they crested a hill, and Southampton spread below them. The harbour was crowded with vessels of all sizes, their masts creating a forest of wood and canvas. And there, pulling away from the dock with agonizing slowness, was a large passenger ship with SS Britannia painted on its hull. "There," Elijah pointed, his voice hoarse. Even from this distance, he could see the gap of dark water widening between ship and dock. 6 feet, 7. "She's already underway, Your Grace," Simmons said, but he was already urging the horses into a final desperate sprint down the hill toward the harbor. The curricle's wheels left the ground at every bump. Elijah was certain they would overturn, certain the horses would stumble, certain everything would end in a tangle of wood and horseflesh and shattered bones. They didn't. At 7:57, Simmons hauled on the reins, bringing the lathered, heaving horses to a sliding stop in the middle of the port road. The curricle's wheels locked, skidding across the cobblestones, sending up a shower of sparks. Elijah didn't wait for it to fully stop. He leaped from the moving vehicle and ran, past startled sailors hauling cargo, past merchants arguing over manifests, past stacks of crates and coils of rope and barrels of tar. His boots pounded against the wooden dock, his breath tearing in his lungs, his vision narrowing to a single point ahead, the Britannia. Already 8 feet from the dock, 9. The water churned between ship and shore, dark and violent and impossible. And there, at the upper rail, in a pale blue traveling gown, her cream bonnet ribbons whipping in the wind, was Edith. Edith! His voice tore from his throat, raw and desperate and utterly exposed. Heads turned all along the dock. Passengers on the ship's deck looked around, searching for the source of the commotion. Edith turned. For one frozen moment, their eyes met across the widening gap. Her hazel eyes went wide with shock, disbelief, something that might have been hope before it was ruthlessly crushed. The gap was 10 feet now. 11. Impossible. Elijah didn't care about impossible. He'd spent 3 months living in a hell of his own creation. What was one more impossibility? He ran to the very edge of the dock, his boots skidding on the wet wood, and without thought, without calculation, without a single moment of the careful deliberation that had defined his entire life, he jumped. Time seemed to slow. The wind caught his coat, turning it into dark wings. The water churned below, ready to swallow him. The ship's hull loomed before him, wet and slick and impossibly far. His boots hit the lower rail with a crack that sent pain shooting through his ankles. His hands scrabbled for purchase on the wet rope netting that hung along the hull. For one terrible second, he felt himself slipping, felt gravity claiming him for the dark water below. Then his fingers closed around the thick hemp, and he held on. Sailors hauled him aboard, their faces showing a mixture of shock and admiration. Passengers crowded the rail, pointing and whispering. Water streamed from Elijah's coat, pooling at his feet. He staggered upright, breathing hard, and looked up. Edith stood at the upper rail, frozen in place, her gloved hands gripping the wood so tightly the fabric had torn. Her face was pale, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And in that moment, Elijah understood with devastating clarity that the jump had been the easy part. Now came the truly impossible task, convincing the woman he'd destroyed that he deserved one more chance. He climbed the stairs to the upper deck, water squelching in his boots, his ruined coat hanging heavy on his shoulders. The crowd parted before him, creating a path to where Edith stood rigid and furious and heartbroken. 10 feet away, he stopped. Edith Ernest. His voice rang across the deck, across the water, back to the crowded dock where hundreds of witnesses stood frozen. "I renounce it. I renounce all of it. The Duchy is dead to me until you return." The words hung in the air, impossible to take back, witnessed by hundreds. A duke renouncing his birthright, for a ruined woman, for love. And Edith, beautiful, wounded Edith, looked at him with eyes full of tears and fury, and something that might have been the ghost of the love they'd once shared. "You're too late, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady and cold and absolutely final. But Elijah was already moving forward, his hand reaching into his coat pocket for the small velvet box that had waited 4 months for this moment. Too late or not, he was here, and he would fight for her until his last breath, even if the battle was already lost. Chapter 5. The Confrontation. The crowd on deck formed a wide circle around them, as if witnessing a duel which, in a way, they were. Not with pistols or swords, but with words that would wound far deeper than any blade. Elijah stood dripping at the base of the stairs leading to the upper deck, his chest heaving, his grey-blue eyes locked on Edith's frozen figure above. Water pooled at his feet, mixing with the salt spray that misted across the deck. His carefully maintained ducal composure had drowned somewhere in the harbour, All that remained was raw, desperate honesty. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like approaching the gallows. The crowd pressed back against the masts and rigging, their whispers falling silent as they watched the Duke ascend toward the woman he'd destroyed. Edith stood rigid at the upper rail, her back to the open sea, the wind whipping her pale blue skirts. Her cream bonnet had come partially loose, allowing strands of chestnut hair to escape and dance around her face. But it was her expression that stopped Elijah's breath, not rage, not tears, but a terrible, composed emptiness, as if she'd carved out everything soft inside herself and replaced it with stone. He reached the upper deck and stopped 10 feet away, suddenly uncertain. In all his desperate planning during the race to Southampton, he hadn't considered this moment, standing before her with hundreds of eyes watching, trying to find words adequate to the magnitude of his betrayal. Edith. Her name came out hoarse, broken. The letters were lies, all of them. Margaret forged them. She hired someone in Cheapside to copy your handwriting. Viscount Harrington confessed this morning. Your maid Clara confessed. Margaret bribed her, threatened Harrington, fabricated everything. The words tumbled out in a rush. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. For a long moment, Edith said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, trembling with controlled fury that was somehow more terrifying than screaming. You were not a fool, Elijah. The crowd leaned closer, shameless in their eavesdropping. You were a coward. Gasps rippled through the passengers. A duke called a coward by a ruined woman in front of hundreds of witnesses. The scandal would be the talk of London for months. Edith didn't care. She was beyond caring what society thought of her. They had already destroyed her. What more could they do? A fool, she continued, taking a step toward him, makes an honest mistake. A fool lacks information or judgment. But you, Elijah Walter, you had all the information you needed. You had me. You had months of courtship, of conversations, of moments when you claimed to see into my very soul. Her voice cracked but didn't break. And you chose to believe 3 pieces of forged paper over everything you knew of my character. I know. Elijah's hands clenched at his sides. God help me, I know. Do you? Another step closer. Her hazel eyes blazed with a fury that seemed to burn away the careful composure. Do you understand what you did? You looked at me, the woman you claimed to love, and you believed I could betray you, that I could lie to you, that I could conduct some sordid affair while planning our wedding. Edith, that is the wound, Elijah, not the scandal, not the ruin, not the whispers or the closed doors or my family's disgrace. She pressed her hand to her chest, right over her heart. Your doubt, your immediate, unquestioning certainty that I was capable of such deception. That's what destroyed me. The words hit like physical blows. Elijah felt each one land, felt the truth of them cut through every excuse he'd constructed. I was wrong. His voice was barely above a whisper. I chose reputation over you. I chose the Duchy's pristine name over my own heart. I was so terrified of being made a fool, of being seen as weak or gullible, that I became the very thing I feared, a fool who destroyed the only real thing in his carefully constructed life. And now you've come to reclaim what you discarded. Edith's laugh was hollow, bitter. You've made your grand gesture, leaped across the harbour, renounced your duchy before witnesses. Very dramatic, your grace. But do you think a confession erases 3 months of hell? Do you think pretty words undo what you did? No. The admission cost him everything. No, I don't. Then what are you doing here? For the first time, her voice truly broke. Why did you come? To ease your guilt? To prove to yourself you're not the villain I know you to be? I came because you deserved the truth. Elijah took a step closer, then another, until only a few feet separated them. Because you deserved to know you were innocent, not ruined, not disgraced, but innocent. And because his knees buckled. The crowd gasped as the Duke of Wrendale sank to his knees on the damp deck, before Edith, before hundreds of witnesses. Water soaked through his trousers. His ruined coat hung heavy on his shoulders. He looked up at her, all pretense stripped away, leaving only a man who had destroyed everything that mattered. I failed you, he said, his voice cracking. I failed the woman I love because I was more afraid of appearing a fool than of being a coward. I was so obsessed with protecting the Duchy's reputation that I sacrificed the only person who ever made me forget I was a duke at all. His hand reached into his coat pocket, trembling slightly, and withdrew a small velvet box. He opened it, and even in the grey morning light, the sapphire inside blazed with blue fire. This was meant for you. I commissioned it in December, spent weeks finding the perfect stone. It had to match your eyes exactly, the way they look when sunlight catches them. When you laugh, his voice broke. I was going to give it to you at Christmas, in front of your family. I had a whole speech planned about how you'd changed everything, how I'd thought duty and love were separate things, until I met you. Edith stared at the ring, her face pale. The sapphire caught the morning light, throwing blue shadows across Elijah's upturned palm, deep blue with veins of gold, surrounded by tiny diamonds that sparkled like captured starlight. The exact shade of her eyes, her hand trembled. For one moment, just one, something flickered across her face. Not forgiveness, but recognition. He had seen her. Before everything fell apart, he had truly seen her. But then the stone mask returned. Pretty words and jewels, Your Grace. Her voice was steady again, cold. But they don't undo your doubt. That ring represents a future you destroyed. A woman you believed in enough to commission a ring for, but not enough to trust when it mattered. I know I don't deserve. No, the word was final. You don't. Elijah stayed on his knees, the ring box still open in his palm. Around them, the crowd watched in breathless silence. This was better than any theatrical performance, a real duke, a real scandal, real heartbreak playing out before their eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Elijah said quietly. I know I don't deserve that. I'm not even asking for another chance, though God knows I want one. I'm asking, he swallowed hard, I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life proving that my doubt was my failing, not yours, that you were everything I believed you to be, and I was too much a coward to trust it. And how exactly do you propose to do that? Edith's voice was sharp. From London while I'm in America? Through letters that may or may not reach me? Through grand public gestures that change nothing? I'll follow you. The words came without thought, without calculation. To America, to the ends of the earth, wherever you go. I'll resign my seat in Parliament. I'll turn the Duchy over to stewards. I'll make way. Official business. The shout from the dock below cut through the tension like a knife. All heads turned toward the shore, where a constable in a dark uniform was pushing through the crowd, waving something above his head. Stop this vessel. I have urgent business with the Duke of Wrendale. The ship's captain, who had been watching the drama unfold with his arms crossed, nodded to his first mate. Drop anchor. Let's hear what the constable wants. The anchor chain rattled. The ship, which had been drifting slowly away from the dock, came to a halt. Sailors scrambled to lower a rope ladder for the constable, who climbed aboard with the agility of someone accustomed to such maneuvers. He reached the upper deck, breathing hard, his face flushed. Your Grace. He bowed stiffly to Elijah, who was still kneeling before Edith. Forgive the intrusion, but I have news of significant importance. Elijah rose slowly to his feet, the ring box still clutched in his hand. Speak. The constable pulled a rolled document from his coat, an official warrant, sealed with wax. Lady Margaret Ashcroft has been arrested this morning at her London townhouse on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and perjury. The evidence against her is substantial. She has confessed. A collective gasp ran through the crowd. Whispers erupted like wildfire. She confessed? Elijah's voice was sharp. When confronted with testimony from Viscount Harrington and the maid Clara, along with the forger's signed statement, yes, Your Grace, we located the forger, Lady Margaret confessed to the entire scheme. The forged letters, the planted evidence, the blackmail. The constable's gaze shifted to Edith. Lady Edith Ernest is officially cleared of all allegations. The charges against her character are hereby declared false and malicious. The deck erupted. Passengers exclaimed, sailors muttered, and somewhere in the crowd, a woman began to clap. Others joined, a smattering of applause that seemed absurd given the circumstances. Edith stood frozen, her hand still gripping the rail. Her innocence, which she had known all along but couldn't prove, was now official, public, witnessed by hundreds and backed by legal documentation. She should have felt relief, vindication, victory. Instead, she felt nothing but a hollow ache. The constable bowed again. Congratulations, Lady Edith. Justice has been served. He departed, leaving silence in his wake. Slowly, Edith turned her gaze back to Elijah. He stood before her, the ring still in his hand, his face showing a mixture of relief and anguish. So now the world knows, Edith said quietly. Now society will whisper about poor Lady Edith, victim of a terrible conspiracy. They'll welcome me back to their drawing rooms, offer apologies that mean nothing, and pretend the last 3 months never happened. Edith, but tell me, Elijah. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The world knows I'm innocent. Margaret has confessed. The evidence is irrefutable. But do you know, not with legal proof or signed confessions or constables waving warrants, do you, in your heart, in your soul, know that I never betrayed you? The question hung between them, the only one that truly mattered. Elijah closed the ring box and met her gaze. I should have known from the beginning. I should have trusted what we had over what some letters claimed. But yes, Edith, I know. Not because of Margaret's confession or Harrington's testimony. I know because I finally stopped being afraid of trusting you and started being terrified of losing you. 3 months too late. But there was less steel in her voice now, more exhaustion. I know, Elijah said again, but I'm here anyway. Too late, too ruined, too desperate. But here. Around them, the crowd waited, breathless, for Edith's response. She looked at the ring box in his hand, at the man kneeling in spirit if not in body, at the future that had been stolen and might impossibly be reclaimed. I need time, she finally said. Not yes, but not no. It was more than Elijah deserved, and he knew it. Take all the time you need, he said softly. I'll wait. Chapter 6. The Secret. The silence that followed Edith's words, I need time, should have been a reprieve. A moment to breathe, to process, to begin the impossible work of rebuilding what had been shattered. But Edith's hand moved, almost unconsciously, to rest against her stomach. Just for a moment, a brief, protective gesture that she tried to disguise by adjusting her shawl. Elijah noticed. Of course he noticed. He had spent months learning to read her, every gesture, every expression. He knew when she was nervous by the way she worried the edge of her glove. He knew when she was pleased by the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. And he knew, God help him, he knew what that particular gesture meant. The color drained from his face. Edith. She saw the recognition in his eyes, and her own hand stilled, trapped against the fabric of her traveling gown. There was no taking it back now, no hiding what she had tried so desperately to keep secret. You are too late, Your Grace. Her voice was steady, but beneath it ran a current of something fierce and protective and utterly final. I carry your child. The deck, which had been alive with whispers and movement, fell absolutely silent. Even the wind seemed to still, the sails hanging limp as if the elements themselves were holding their breath. Elijah's face transformed. Shock first, his eyes widening, his lips parting on words that wouldn't come. Then anguish, devastating and complete, as he understood the full weight of what she'd just revealed. And finally, breaking through everything else, a fierce protectiveness that made him take an instinctive step forward before he caught himself. A child, the words came out barely above a whisper. Our child. Yes. Edith's chin lifted, defiant despite the tears now threatening at the corners of her eyes. Conceived before the scandal, before your letters, before you decided I was a woman of questionable virtue. Around them, the crowd erupted in fresh whispers. This was beyond scandal now, this was dynastic. An heir to the Duke of Wrendale, carried by a woman he'd publicly cast aside. Elijah seemed not to hear them. His entire focus was on Edith, on the hand still resting protectively against her stomach. When, his voice cracked, when did you know? Flashback 1 week after the scandal. Edith had realized in the worst possible way, waking at dawn with nausea so violent she barely made it to the basin. Her mother, hearing the sounds of distress, had come to her room with a knowing look and careful questions. How long has it been since your last courses, dear? Edith had counted backward with trembling fingers. 6 weeks. 7. She'd been so consumed with the scandal, with Elijah's rejection, that she hadn't noticed the absence of something so fundamental. The physician, her mother, summoned a discreet man who attended many desperate families, had confirmed what Edith already knew in her bones. You're with child, Lady Edith, perhaps 2 months along. 2 months, which meant the child had been conceived in late December, during those final perfect weeks before everything shattered, before forged letters and cold dismissals and the death of every dream she'd dared to have. She'd sat in her room after the physician left, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach, and tried to decide what to do. She could tell Elijah, should tell him he was the father, after all. He had a right to know. But then she imagined the conversation, imagined presenting herself at Wrendale House, being granted an audience through the intervention of servants who looked at her with pity or contempt. Imagined standing before him and saying, "I carry your child." And she imagined his response. Another lie. Another manipulation. Whose bastard is it really, Lady Edith? Harrington's? The thought had been enough to make her physically ill again. No, she wouldn't give him another reason to doubt her. Wouldn't give him the satisfaction of rejecting both her and their child. Wouldn't watch him calculate whether the timing made the child legitimate or whether the scandal made it suspect. She would go to America. She would raise the child alone. And Elijah Walter, Duke of Wrendale, would never know that he'd destroyed not just a woman, but a family. Back to present the ship's deck. I realized a week after you dissolved the engagement. Edith's voice was carefully controlled. I was unwell one morning, my mother suspected. A physician confirmed it. A week. Elijah's voice was hollow. You've known for nearly 3 months. Yes, and you didn't tell me. No. The word was sharp, defensive. Did you think I would come to you with this news? So you could believe it was another man's? So you could add Lyra to adulteresses in your ledger of my sins? Edith, no, I would never. You would. She cut him off, her voice rising. You did. You believed the letters without question. You believed I was capable of betraying you, of conducting an affair while planning our wedding. Why would this be any different? Why wouldn't you assume the child was Harrington's, or some other imaginary lover's? The accusation landed like a physical blow. Elijah's face crumpled because he knew they both knew she was right. 3 months ago, if she had come to him with news of a pregnancy, he would have doubted, would have demanded proof, would have seen it as further evidence of her deception rather than the truth it was. I don't know how to prove to you that I would have believed, Elijah said quietly. Because you're right 3 months ago, I might not have. But now, Edith, now... He took a step toward her, his hand reaching out, then stopping mid-air as if he'd hit an invisible barrier. Uncertain if he had the right to touch her, uncertain if he'd forfeited that privilege forever. My child, he breathed, and his voice was equal parts wonder and devastation. Our child. His gaze dropped to where her hand still rested against her stomach, and something in his expression shifted. The careful ducal mask he'd worn for so long, already cracked by his desperate leap and public confession, shattered completely. If you sail, he said, his voice breaking, you sail with my heart, my air, and my every reason to wake each morning. Your heir. Edith's laugh was bitter. Is that what matters to you? The continuation of the precious Wrendale line? No. The word was fierce, absolute. Damn the Wrendale line. Damn the Duchy. Damn every title and estate and responsibility I've ever had. He moved closer, and this time he didn't stop himself from reaching for her hand. She didn't pull away, though she didn't reciprocate either. What matters is you and our child. The family I destroyed before I even knew it existed. His thumb brushed across her gloved knuckles, the touch achingly gentle. The Duchy means nothing, Edith. England means nothing. You are my country. You and this child are every territory worth fighting for. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in Edith's eyes. Not forgiveness, but a crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. Then it hardened again. You renounced your duchy for me, she said. A grand gesture witnessed by hundreds. But what about your doubt, Elijah? Can you renounce that too? Can you look at me, truly look at me, and trust what you see rather than what you fear? The question hung between them, more challenging than any physical barrier. Elijah met her gaze, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. I see a woman I should have trusted from the beginning. I see the mother of my child. I see the only person who ever made me want to be more than a title and a duty. He paused. And I see someone who has every right to sail away and never look back. That's not an answer. Yes, he said simply. Yes, I can renounce my doubt. I already have. The moment I learned the truth, everything I thought I knew about trust and duty and reputation dissolved. What remains is this. I trust you. I believe you. And if you give me the chance, I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving it. Edith stared at him, searching his face for the lie, for the crack in the certainty. She found none. But trust, once shattered, couldn't be rebuilt with words alone. Your Grace, my lady. The gruff voice cut through the tension. Captain Morrison stepped forward, a weathered man in his 50s, with the bearing of someone who'd spent more of his life at sea than on land. His face was deeply lined, his hands calloused, his eyes sharp with the kind of wisdom that came from watching human drama play out on his decks for decades. "I've seen many things in my years at sea," he said, his tone matter of fact. "Storms that would terrify the Almighty himself. Mutinies, births and deaths and every human folly in between." He looked directly at Elijah. "But never, in all my days, have I seen a duke leap aboard my ship like a common sailor." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. The captain turned to his first mate. "Lower the gangplank." "Captain?" The first mate looked confused. "You heard me. Lower it." The crew scrambled to obey. The heavy wooden gangplank normally used for boarding and disembarking at dock was swung out over the gap between ship and shore. It extended slowly, creaking under its own weight, until it formed a narrow bridge from the ship's deck back to the Southampton dock, 8 feet of weathered wood, barely 3 feet wide, suspended over churning water. Captain Morrison gestured to the precarious bridge. "The lady boarded my ship of her own free will, seeking passage to America. That was her choice, and I respect it." He looked at Edith. "But circumstances have changed. Evidence has come to light. Confessions have been made." His gaze shifted to Elijah. "And a duke has publicly renounced his title for her." He crossed his arms. "So, I'm giving you a choice, Lady Edith. You can stay aboard this ship, and I'll see you safely to Boston. Or you can cross that gangplank back to England, back to the man who wronged you but seems determined to make it right." He paused, his weathered face serious. "But know this, if you board this ship again of your own will, I'll not stop her a second time. I won't turn around mid-voyage. I won't alter course for second thoughts." He looked at Elijah. "Make your case, Your Grace, and make it count." The captain stepped back, leaving Edith and Elijah alone in their circle of witnesses. Edith turned to stare at the gangplank. It swayed slightly in the wind, the narrow bridge between two futures. On one side, England with all its scandal and whispers, but also the possibility of reclaiming what had been stolen. On the other, America, freedom and anonymity, but also exile and loneliness. And beneath her hand, still pressed protectively to her stomach, a child who deserved more than either extreme. A child who deserved a father and a mother, truth and trust, love without conditions. "Edith." Elijah's voice was soft, but it carried. "I can't undo the past 3 months. I can't erase the pain I caused or restore the time we lost. But I can promise you this. If you come back, it won't be as the woman I forgave. It will be as the woman who was wronged, and every door in London will know the difference." He pulled the velvet ring box from his pocket again, opening it to reveal the sapphire that caught the morning light. This ring was meant to symbolize a beginning. Instead, it became a monument to my failure. But if you'll have it, if you'll have me, it can be something else. Not a beginning, because we can't start over, but a continuation, a choice to keep building even after everything fell apart. He held the box out, not as a demand, but as an offering. "Come back, Edith, not for me, not for the Duchy, for our child, for the family we could be if we're both brave enough to try." Edith looked at the ring, at Elijah, at the gangplank swaying between them. Her hand moved from her stomach to grip the ship's rail, her knuckles white beneath the torn gloves. The crowd held its collective breath, and the choice, impossible, terrifying, irrevocable, waited to be made. Chapter 7. The Choice. The gangplank swayed gently in the breeze, a narrow bridge of weathered wood suspended over dark water. 8 feet long, 3 feet wide, with rope railings on either side that looked far too insubstantial for the weight of the decision they represented. Edith stared at it, her vision blurring slightly at the edges. One path led back to England, back to Elijah, back to uncertainty, back to a society that had crucified her and would now, presumably, resurrect her with equal enthusiasm. The other path led to America, to freedom from scandal and whispers, to exile, but also to a loneliness so profound she could already feel its weight. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach again, a gesture that was becoming habit. Beneath the fabric of her traveling gown, beneath her corset and chemise, a life was growing. A child who deserved more than a mother's bitterness and a father's absence. But did that child deserve a father who had doubted its mother so completely? A father who had chosen reputation over trust, who had believed the worst without question? The wind tugged at her bonnet, and she reached up to steady it, buying herself time to think. Around her, The crowd watched with rapt attention, passengers and crew alike, all of them witnesses to a drama better than any stage play. "The child deserves a family," Elijah said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "But more than that, you deserve justice. You deserve to be believed, to be trusted, to be valued for exactly who you are." Edith turned to look at him. He stood at the base of the gangplank, water still dripping from his coat, the sapphire ring box clutched in one hand. He looked nothing like the perfect duke she'd once known, the man of careful composure and aristocratic bearing. He looked broken, desperate, human. "Justice," she repeated, tasting the word. "Margaret will stand trial. My name will be cleared. Society will welcome me back with their hollow apologies and false sympathy." Her voice hardened. "Is that justice, Elijah, or is it just another performance? It's not enough." He took a careful step closer to the gangplank's edge. "Nothing will ever be enough to undo what I did, but it's a start. It's the truth, made public and undeniable." Edith looked back at the gangplank, then at the open sea beyond. "And what happens when the next scandal touches us? When the next piece of evidence appears, the next rumor circulates? Will you believe me then? Or will you—" "I will believe you." The words came swift and certain. "I will always believe you, because I've learned what it costs not to." Pretty promises. But there was less steel in her voice now, more exhaustion, more uncertainty. "Not promises, vows." Elijah's grey-blue eyes held hers, the kind that can't be broken without destroying the man who makes them. Edith's fingers tightened on the rail. She was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of defending herself, tired of carrying the weight of her innocence like a burden no one else wanted to acknowledge. But she was also angry, deeply, righteously angry at what had been stolen from her. "If I return," she said, her voice carrying across the deck, clear and strong enough that every witness could hear, "it will not be as your redemption or your second chance." Elijah went very still. "It will be as your equal," Edith continued. "I will not be the Duchess who was forgiven for sins she never committed. I will be the Duchess who was wronged, and every door in London will know the difference." She saw him absorb the words, saw the moment he understood exactly what she was demanding. Not forgiveness, not a return to what they'd had, but something new, something harder won, and more honest. "Then I will walk before you and open every one of those doors," Elijah said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. He moved onto the gangplank, taking several steps until he stood at its center, suspended between ship and shore. "I will proclaim your innocence in Parliament. I will stand before the House of Lords and every drawing-room in London and tell them exactly what was done to you." The crowd murmured, shocked by the public declaration. "I will see Margaret tried and punished to the fullest extent of the law," Elijah continued. "I will spend every day, every single day for the rest of my life, proving that my doubt was my failing, not yours, that the scandal was mine to bear, not yours to endure." He held out his hand, though he was still too far away for her to reach it. "Come back, Edith, not as my forgiven fiancée, as my equal, as the woman I should have trusted from the beginning." Around them, the witnesses watched with bated breath. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman whispered, "She should make him suffer more. 3 months of hell, and he thinks one leap is enough?" A man's voice answered, "He jumped 6 feet of open water for her. He's renouncing his duchy in front of hundreds. That's suffering enough, I'd say." "It's not about suffering," an older woman interjected. "It's about whether she can trust him again." That, Edith thought, was the only question that mattered. Could she trust him? Not with her reputation or her social standing, those were external things that could be rebuilt or abandoned. Could she trust him with her heart, with their child's future, with the vulnerable, honest parts of herself that she'd locked away after he'd rejected her? She didn't know. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She couldn't make this decision based on fear. Not fear of more pain, not fear of society's judgment, not fear of being wrong. She had to choose based on hope. However fragile, however cautious, Edith took one step toward the gangplank. The crowd erupted in murmurs and gasps, every eye fixed on her as she moved to the edge of the narrow bridge. Elijah didn't move. He stood at the center of the gangplank, his hand still extended, and he waited. He didn't rush her, didn't call out encouragement, didn't make demands or promises. He simply waited, giving her the space to choose. Edith placed one foot on the wooden plank. It swayed slightly beneath her weight, and she gripped the rope railing for balance. The water churned 8 feet below, dark and unforgiving. She took another step, then another. The gangplank creaked with each footfall. The rope railing was rough beneath her torn gloves. The wind pulled at her skirts, making each step a small act of defiance against the elements themselves. Halfway across, suspended between ship and shore, between exile and return, she reached Elijah. He stood perfectly still, his hand extended palm up between them. An offering, not a demand. "Not to lead you," he said quietly. His voice meant only for her despite the hundreds watching. "To walk beside you." Edith looked at his hand, at the man who had broken her heart and was now offering her his own, cracked and imperfect. She reached out and placed her hand in his. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning. A tentative, fragile beginning built on rubble and hope in equal measure. Elijah's fingers closed gently around hers. For a moment, they simply stood there, suspended between two worlds, connected by nothing more than a touch and a choice. Then, together, they began to walk. Each step was deliberate, measured. Elijah matched his pace to hers, never pulling, never pushing, just walking beside her as the gangplank swayed beneath them and the crowd held its collective breath. They reached the dock, solid ground after the uncertainty of the suspended bridge. Behind them, the SS Britannia waited, its sails still slack, its passenger manifest short one name. The crowd on the dock erupted. Some cheered, caught up in the romance of it, the scandal, the drama of a duke who had leaped for love. Others whispered furiously, already composing the letters they would write, the gossip they would spread. A few applauded with genuine joy, moved by the raw honesty of what they'd witnessed. Edith didn't smile. Her face remained composed, serious, as she allowed Elijah to guide her through the crowd toward his waiting curricle. But she didn't let go of his hand either. Simmons, the driver, straightened when he saw them approaching. His eyes widened at Edith's presence, but he was too well trained to comment. He simply opened the curricle door and stepped back. Before Elijah could help her up, he paused. He unwrapped his soaked cloak from his shoulders and draped it around hers. It was cold and damp, but it cut the wind that had begun to pick up from the harbor. "Thank you," Edith said quietly, the first words she'd spoken to him that weren't accusations or conditions. "Always," Lyra replied. They climbed into the curricle together. As Simmons took his position and prepared to drive, a constable approached at a run, his face flushed. "Your Grace, my lady," he bowed hastily. "I bring news. Lady Margaret Ashcroft is in custody at Newgate. She'll stand trial within the fortnight. The charges are substantial fraud, conspiracy, perjury, and subornation of perjury." "Good," Elijah said shortly. Then, seeing Edith's expression, he added, "Will Lady Edith's testimony be required?" "The prosecution would welcome it, Your Grace, but with Lord Harrington's confession and the maid's testimony, Lady Margaret's own confession makes the case quite strong regardless. Then Lady Edith will decide whether she wishes to testify." Elijah looked at her. "It's your choice. All of it is your choice now." Edith nodded slowly. "I'll consider it." The constable bowed again and departed. As the curricle began to move, pulling away from the docks and the ship that would have carried her to a new life, Edith finally spoke. "This doesn't mean I've forgiven you." Elijah's hand, which had been resting near hers on the seat, didn't move to take it again. "I know. It means I'm giving you the chance to earn it. Nothing more." "I know," he repeated, "but it means you'll let me try, and that's more than I deserve." The curricle rolled through Southampton's streets, past the warehouses and merchant shops, toward the road that would take them back to London, back to scandal and whispers and the long, difficult work of rebuilding trust from ruins. Edith leaned back against the seat, one hand still pressed protectively to her stomach. Through the fabric of Elijah's cloak, she could feel the faint, impossible flutter that might have been her imagination, or might have been the first movements of the life within her. Their child, the innocent party in all of this, deserving of both parents, deserving of a family built on truth rather than convenience. "I have conditions," Edith said. Elijah turned to her, his expression serious. "Name them. We don't marry immediately. I need time. Time to trust you again. Time to see if you can truly be the man you're promising to be." "Agreed. I want my own household until we're ready. Not the east wing of some estate where I'm hidden away. My own home, where I have autonomy and dignity. I'll purchase a townhouse in your name. Tomorrow, if you wish. And when the child comes," she hesitated, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach again. "You will not question its legitimacy, not publicly, not privately. You will claim this child as yours without doubt or reservation." Elijah's eyes filled with tears the first time she'd seen him truly cry. "Edith, that child is mine, ours. I would claim it before God and every peer in England without hesitation." She searched his face for doubt, for the shadow of suspicion. Found none. "All right," she said quietly. "Then we try. One day at a time, one choice at a time, until either trust is rebuilt or we admit it can't be done." "One day at a time," Elijah echoed. "Starting now." The curricle rolled on, carrying them both back toward an uncertain future that might impossibly contain something worth fighting for. Behind them, the SS Britannia raised its anchor and prepared once again to sail. But its passenger manifest was lighter by one name. Lady Edith Ernest had chosen England, had chosen to fight rather than flee. Whether she had chosen love remained to be seen. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. 1 month later, the courtroom was packed to suffocation. Every seat filled, every inch of standing room claimed by members of London society who had come to witness the trial of Lady Margaret Ashcroft. The public gallery overflowed with spectators craning their necks for a better view, while outside, crowds gathered in the street, waiting for news. This was the scandal of the decade, a conspiracy involving a duke's cousin, forged letters, bribed servants, and blackmail. The newspapers had been breathless in their coverage for weeks, each new revelation more sensational than the last. Edith sat in the front row of the gallery, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a deep blue gown, the color of dignity and mourning both, and her face was composed, though her knuckles were white where her fingers pressed together. Elijah sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, but careful not to presume intimacy she hadn't yet granted. Over the past month, they had existed in a strange liminal space, not quite together, not quite apart. He had purchased a townhouse for her in Bloomsbury, respectable and autonomous. He visited daily but never stayed past propriety's limits. They walked, they talked, they began, cautiously, to rebuild what had been shattered, but they had not yet married. Edith had been firm on that point. "Trust first," she had said, "then vows." Now, in the packed courtroom, they waited for justice. Lady Margaret Ashcroft stood in the dock, her face a mask of cold fury. She wore black mourning for her own downfall, perhaps, and her hands gripped the rail before her with white-knuckled intensity. When her eyes swept across the crowd and landed on Edith, there was no remorse in them, only hatred. The judge, Lord Chief Justice Abbott, called the court to order. The charges were read: conspiracy to defraud, perjury, and subornation of perjury. "How does the defendant plead?" the judge asked. Margaret's voice was clear and defiant. "Not guilty, my lord." A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone knew she had confessed when first arrested. But now, in the formal setting of the court, she was recanting. The prosecution began its case methodically. First came Viscount Harrington, looking haggard and deeply ashamed as he took the witness stand. "Lord Harrington," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about your interactions with Lady Margaret Ashcroft in January of this year." Harrington's voice was low but clear. "She approached me at a ball. She told me she knew about my affair with Lady Crestwood. She said if I cooperated with her, she would keep my secret. If I didn't," he swallowed hard, "she would ensure Lord Crestwood learned everything." "And what did this cooperation entail?" "Silence. She told me that letters would surface implicating Lady Edith Ernest in an affair with me. I was to say nothing, neither confirm nor deny. She said my silence would be damning enough." "And did you comply?" "To my eternal shame, yes. I remained silent while an innocent woman was destroyed." Harrington's voice cracked. "Lady Margaret fabricated the entire affair. She forged letters, planted evidence, and blackmailed me into complicity." Margaret's lawyer cross-examined aggressively, but Harrington's testimony held. He had written statements, dates, witnesses to some of their conversations. His confession was damning. Next came Clara, the maid. She was pale and trembling, but her testimony was clear. "Lady Margaret paid me £50, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She gave me a cufflink, said it belonged to Viscount Harrington, and told me to place it in Lady Edith's sitting room, and I was to mention to other servants that I'd seen a gentleman caller at odd hours." "Did you see any such caller?" "No, ma'am, never." Lady Edith was always proper, always accompanied, but I said what Lady Margaret paid me to say, and tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm so sorry. I was desperate. My father was in debt. I thought it was just gossip. I didn't understand it would destroy her. The prosecutor presented the forged letters, along with testimony from the handwriting expert who had examined them. He confirmed what Elijah had discovered. The letters were expert forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Tiny inconsistencies in letter formation, unnatural consistency of script, ink that didn't match Edith's usual correspondence. Finally, the prosecution read Margaret's initial confession given to the constable the morning of Edith's attempted departure into the record. When it was the defense's turn, Margaret took the stand. Her lawyer had advised against it, but she insisted. She wanted her voice heard. Lady Margaret, her lawyer began carefully, please explain to the court your motivations. Margaret turned to face the judge directly, her chin lifted. I did it for my son. Edward is 14 years old. He has been raised his entire life with the understanding that he would inherit the Duchy of Wrendale should anything happen to the Duke. It was his birthright, his future, and Lady Edith's engagement threatened that future? The Duke was throwing away the duchy on a nobody. Margaret's voice dripped with contempt. A girl from an impoverished family with nothing to offer but a pretty face. Within a year, she would have produced an heir, and my son, my brilliant, deserving son, would have been cast aside. So you fabricated evidence to prevent the marriage? I protected my son's interests. The Duke had no right to be so reckless with the family legacy. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Even Margaret's lawyer looked pained. The prosecutor stood for cross-examination. Lady Margaret, do you feel any remorse for what your actions did to Lady Edith Ernest? Margaret's eyes found Edith in the gallery. She survived, didn't she? She's sitting right there, about to become a duchess after all. I'd say she's done quite well for herself. She nearly fled to America in exile. Her reputation was destroyed. Her family was disgraced. And you feel no remorse? I feel regret that my plan didn't succeed. Margaret's voice was ice. But remorse for protecting my son? Never. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom exploded in noise. Margaret stood rigid in the dock, her face finally showing a crack in its composure. Her lawyer slumped. Her son, Edward, sitting in the gallery, began to weep. Lord Chief Justice Abbott called for silence. When it finally came, he looked at Margaret with an expression of profound distaste. Lady Margaret Ashcroft, you have been found guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and perjury. You attempted to destroy an innocent woman's life to advance your own ambitions. You bribed servants, blackmailed peers, and forged documents. The sentence of this court is exile to the West Indies for a period of 10 years. Your son, Edward Ashcroft, is hereby stripped of his position in the line of succession to the Duchy of Wrendale. Margaret's face went white. My son had nothing to do with this. You cannot punish him for... Your son is not being punished, madam, but neither will he benefit from your crimes. He will remain in England under the guardianship of his paternal uncle. You, however, will sail within the month. The gavel came down. Court is adjourned. As Margaret was led away, still protesting, Edith felt Elijah's hand close gently around hers. She didn't pull away. It's over, he said quietly. No, Edith replied. Now it begins. Elijah stood before the assembled peers, his hands gripping the sides of the lectern. Every seat was filled. Every eye was on him. My lords, he began, his voice carrying through the chamber, I stand before you today not as the Duke of Wrendale, but as a man who wronged the woman he loves. A murmur ran through the assembly. This was unprecedented. Dukes did not make public confessions of personal failure. Lady Edith Ernest is innocent of every accusation levelled against her. The evidence was fabricated by my cousin, Lady Margaret Ashcroft, in a conspiracy to prevent our marriage. This has been proven beyond doubt in a court of law. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the chamber. But Lady Margaret's guilt does not absolve mine. When those forged letters arrived, I believed them without question. I chose to protect my reputation over trusting the woman I claimed to love. I dissolved our engagement publicly, without granting her even a single audience, to defend herself. The silence was absolute. I failed her, Elijah continued, his voice rough with emotion. I failed her in every way. A man can fail the person he loves, and I will spend the rest of my life making amends for that failure." He straightened. "Let the record show that Lady Edith Ernest's name is cleared. Let it show that she was the victim of a malicious conspiracy, and that any scandal attached to her name is hereby repudiated by this body and by me personally." The speech was reprinted in every London newspaper the next day. By week's end, Edith's invitations had resumed, not with the tepid politeness of society trying to forget a scandal, but with genuine apologies and acknowledgement of the wrong done to her. Summer came to London, warm and golden. Edith's pregnancy became visible, and with it came a strange social acceptance. A duchess-to-be, carrying the heir to Wrendale, was beyond reproach, even if the timing raised eyebrows. Elijah visited her townhouse every day. Sometimes they walked in nearby gardens, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Sometimes they sat in her drawing room and talked for hours about everything and nothing, rebuilding the easy conversation they'd once shared. And every evening, before he left, he would ask permission to speak to their child. The first time, Edith had been startled. "Speak to? May I?" He gestured to her growing belly. She had nodded, uncertain. Elijah had knelt before her chair and placed his hand gently on her stomach. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I'm your father. I've made many mistakes, but I promise you this. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you and your mother." It became a ritual. Each evening, he would kneel and talk to their unborn child, reading poetry, telling stories, making promises. And each evening, Edith felt the tight knot of anger in her chest loosen just slightly. One warm evening in August, as they walked through the gardens of Wrendale Estate, she had finally agreed to visit. Edith stopped by a rose arbor. "You're trying," she said, not looking at him. "I see that." "I'll never stop trying," Elijah replied. She turned to face him. "I'm not ready to forgive you yet. I don't know if I ever will be, fully. But," she paused, searching for the right words, "I'm ready to marry you, not because society demands it, or because of the child, but because I want to see if we can build something new from what was broken." Elijah's eyes filled with tears. "That's all I could ever ask for." They married in a small chapel on the Wrendale estate, with only immediate family present. No society, no spectacle, no grand performance for London's entertainment. Edith wore a simple cream gown, her pregnant belly visible beneath the empire waist. She wore no veil. "I will not be hidden," she had told Elijah when discussing the ceremony. "Not my face, not my condition, not my truth." "Then I'll marry you in broad daylight before God and everyone," he had replied. When the vicar asked for their vows, they had rejected the traditional words in favor of their own. Elijah spoke first, his voice steady. "I vow to trust you, to believe you, and to never let duty eclipse love again. I vow to be your partner, your equal, and your champion. I vow to earn your trust every day for the rest of our lives." Edith's vows were just as firm. "I vow to hold you accountable, to demand your respect, and to build a life where love is the duty we both serve. I vow to forgive when you stumble, but never to forget what it cost us to reach this moment. And I vow to choose you every day, as long as you continue to deserve that choice." The sapphire ring commissioned so long ago finally found its home on her finger. They were husband and wife, Duke and Duchess. But more than that, they were two people who had learned that love without trust was hollow, and that trust broken could be rebuilt slowly, painfully, but possible. The labor was long and difficult. Elijah refused to leave, despite the midwife's protests that childbirth was no place for husbands, let alone dukes. "I've failed her before," he said firmly. "I won't fail her now." He held Edith's hand through every contraction, every scream, every moment of agony. And when the baby finally came, squalling and red-faced and perfect, he wept openly. "A daughter," the midwife announced. Elijah looked at Edith, exhausted and radiant, holding their child. "What shall we name her?" "Charlotte," Edith said without hesitation. "Charlotte Edith Walter." Elijah's breath caught. Charlotte, the name of his lost sister. The grief he'd carried for so long, transformed into new life. "Are you certain?" His voice was thick with emotion. "Named for what we almost lost," Edith said softly, "and what we chose to build." He bent to kiss her forehead, then gazed at his daughter. "A new beginning," he whispered. "Yes," Edith agreed, "for all of us." The spring sun was warm on the Southampton Docks as Elijah, Edith, and Charlotte walked along the pier. Charlotte, now 5 months old with her mother's hazel eyes and her father's dark hair, was cradled in Elijah's arms, fascinated by the ships and seagulls. Edith stopped at the spot where the SS Britannia had been moored just over a year ago, the same dock where she had stood on the ship's deck, preparing to sail away forever. "I almost left from here," she said quietly. Elijah shifted Charlotte to one arm and took Edith's hand with the other. "And I almost let you." They stood in silence for a moment, watching ships prepare to depart new passengers with their own stories, their own destinations. "Do you regret it?" Edith asked. "The leap? The renunciation? Everything that came after?" Elijah looked at her, his wife, his Duchess, the woman who had demanded he become more than his title. Then he looked at Charlotte, gurgling happily in his arms. "Never," he said. "The Duchy was never truly mine until I chose you, until I learned that titles mean nothing without someone to share them with, someone who sees past the trappings to the man beneath." Edith squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you jumped." "So am I," he smiled. "Though perhaps next time, choose a ship docked a bit closer to shore." She laughed, the first truly carefree laugh he'd heard from her since before the scandal. "There won't be a next time. We're past running now." "Yes," Elijah agreed. "Now we stand together, through whatever comes." Charlotte chose that moment to reach for her mother, and Edith took her, settling the baby against her hip. The three of them stood at the dock's edge, a family forged from scandal and suspicion, broken trust and hard-won redemption. A duke who had learned that love required not just passion, but trust, and that trust, once broken, must be earned back through action, not words. A duchess who had demanded not forgiveness, but change, and who had been brave enough to accept it when it came. And between them, a child born of scandal, but raised in a love that was hard-won and true. A love that had survived doubt, distance, and the cruelty of false accusations. A love that had emerged stronger for having been tested. "Shall we go home?" Elijah asked. Edith looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the perfect duke she'd once idealized, but the flawed, honest man he'd become. The man who had leaped across impossible gaps for her. The man who read to their daughter every night and still asked Edith's permission before taking her hand. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." They turned from the docks, walking back toward their carriage. Edith's hand in Elijah's, Charlotte nestled between them, the Southampton harbour at their backs, and their future uncertain but shared stretching before them. Behind them, a ship raised its sails and prepared to depart. But this time, they weren't watching it leave. They were walking away together, toward the life they had chosen, toward home. They say trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. But Elijah and Edith learned something different. That broken trust, carefully rebuilt with honesty and time, can become stronger than trust that was never tested. Their love was not the fairy tale Edith had once dreamed of. It was something better. It was real, flawed, and hard-won, and it was enough. That's the story of Edith and the Duke, who leaped across impossible gaps, both physical and emotional, to reclaim what he had nearly destroyed. Their tale wasn't about perfect love or flawless heroes. It was about trust shattered and painstakingly rebuilt, about a woman who demanded not forgiveness, but change, and about a man who learned that titles mean nothing without the courage to trust the person you claim to love. If this story moved you, if you felt Edith's pain, Elijah's desperation, or the hope of their hard-won redemption, please let me know by hitting that like button. Your support tells me these stories of complex love and second chances matter to you. And if you're hungry for more tales of scandal, betrayal, and love that refuses to surrender, stories where the heroines don't just forgive, they demand accountability, then subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell. Because every week, I bring you historical romances that don't shy away from the messy, complicated truth of relationships. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. Did Edith make the right choice returning to Elijah, or should she have sailed to America and built a life without him? Would you have been able to forgive someone who doubted you so completely, even after they proved the accusations false? And here's the big question. Do you think trust, once shattered, can ever truly be rebuilt, or is it forever marked by cracks? Share your thoughts below. I read every single comment, and I love seeing how these stories spark real conversations about love, forgiveness, and what we owe each other in relationships. If you enjoyed this story, you might also love these videos. Over here, the tale of a bride who discovered her groom's terrible secret on their wedding night. And here, The story of a duchess who faked her own death to escape a loveless marriage, only to be found by the husband who never stopped searching. Thank you so much for spending this time with Edith and Elijah. Until next time, remember, the greatest love stories aren't about perfection, they're about people brave enough to fight for each other even after everything falls apart. See you in the next story.